The Vikings have long been associated with a reputation for being crude and ruthless raiders. However, when it comes to their diet, they displayed surprising refinement and a penchant for healthy and well-rounded meals. It's important to note that Vikings organized their daily lives around 2 meals rather than the 3 we are accustomed to today. The first meal, known as the dagmal or day meal, was consumed approximately an hour after waking up. It often consisted of leftover scouse from the previous night, accompanied by fruit and stale bread. Children might enjoy porridge made from buckwheat, oats, and millet with added fruits. The second meal, called nattmal or evening meal, took place after a day's work and was typically more substantial, featuring meat and stew. The Vikings favored boiling as their primary method of cooking meat. They obtained meat from various sources, including reindeer, elk, bear, horses, cows, and pigs. Viking cooks would boil the protein in cauldrons over a fire. For grand feasts, they even dug pits in the ground, lined them with wood, filled them with water and hot stones, and simmered the meat in them. The boiled meat formed the basis of a stew called scouse, a cornerstone of the Viking diet. Leftover liquid from the scouse would be used to cook more vegetables and meat, infusing the stew with flavors over days and weeks. This process also resulted in a layer of fat that rose to the top, both preserving the stew and adding nutritional value. Archaeologists have gleaned valuable information about Viking diets from excavations, including the remnants found in ancient outhouses. These findings indicate that Vikings were susceptible to intestinal parasites, likely due to the consumption of undercooked meat. While the Vikings made efforts to preserve their food, including meats, for extended periods, these precautions may not have been sufficient to prevent worm infestations. Studies also reveal that Vikings consumed poisonous plants, either as vegetables or ground into flour for making bread. This highlights their resilience and ability to adapt to their environment. Given the Vikings' close relationship with the sea, it's unsurprising that fish was a fundamental part of their diet. They fished in rivers, lakes, streams, and oceans, relishing both saltwater and freshwater fish. To ensure longevity, fish was smoked, salted, and dried for extended voyages and the harsh winter months. Herring was a ubiquitous fish on Viking plates, while dried cod, known as stockfish, was likely traded throughout Europe. Vikings also engaged in farming and kept animals such as cows, sheep, goats, and domesticated chickens. This allowed them to enjoy dairy products, including butter, cheese, yogurt, and skyr, a soft yogurt-like cheese. While the Viking diet primarily consisted of meat, fish, and dairy, there is evidence to suggest that vegetables and fruits were also a part of their culinary repertoire. However, due to the harsh climate and limited agricultural practices, fresh produce was not as readily available. Vikings relied on root vegetables like carrots, onions, and turnips, which could be stored for longer periods. They also gathered wild berries, apples, and plums when in season. These fruits and vegetables provided important nutrients and added variety to their meals. So, were there vegans among the Vikings? The Vikings were a seafaring people from Scandinavia who lived during the late 8th century to the mid-11th century. Based on the available historical and archaeological evidence, it is unlikely that there were vegans among the Vikings. The Vikings lived in regions with harsh climates, such as Scandinavia, where it was challenging to grow crops. The majority of their diet consisted of what they could hunt, fish, or gather, making it difficult for them to sustain themselves solely on plant-based foods. Additionally, Viking society was deeply rooted in traditions and cultural practices that revolved around hunting and animal husbandry. Eating meat and dairy products were integral parts of their culinary heritage, and deviating from these practices would have been seen as a significant departure from their way of life. The Vikings needed a high-calorie diet to sustain their physically demanding lifestyles, which included exploration, raiding, and battling. Animal products, such as meat and dairy, provided essential nutrients like protein, fat, and vitamins necessary for their energy needs and overall health. Moreover, Vikings were skilled seafarers and explorers, often embarking on long voyages. During these journeys, relying on animal-based foods was more practical and efficient, as they provided a concentrated source of energy and could be preserved for extended periods. It's worth noting that some individuals within the Viking society may have practiced occasional or temporary abstinence from animal products for religious or ritualistic purposes. For instance, during certain religious festivals, offerings of plant-based foods and grains were made to the gods. However, their geographical isolation and relatively limited interactions with other societies limited their exposure to alternative dietary choices. Archaeological evidence suggests the presence of non-meat food items, such as grains and legumes, in Viking settlements, although their consumption may have been limited compared to animal products. In conclusion, while the Vikings did not adhere to a vegan lifestyle, their diet was not solely focused on meat consumption. They incorporated a variety of foods into their meals, including meat, fish, dairy, grains, vegetables, and fruits. Their diet was shaped by the harsh Scandinavian environment, their seafaring lifestyle, the need for sustenance during long voyages, their cultural traditions and norms, and their nutritional requirements.